This week in IT SPARC Cast, Replit CEO says coding is dead, Intel is about to take a big dump, and we jump headfirst into the signal kerfuffle. And we're going to piss everybody off.
Oh, yeah.
Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barger.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's see what's going on out there. It's April showers time.
It's Friday, April 4th. IT SPARC Cast is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the news bites. Okay, Lou, we're going to jump right into this with we don't need to code anymore. Nobody needs to code.
No. Okay, right? Maybe. I don't know. We have feelings about this. Why don't you just go through this and tell us what you found out?
So a gentleman named Amjad Masad, who is the CEO of Replit and was the original engineer for Code Academy. So he has some serious street cred when it comes to coding, has said, you shouldn't bother learning to code anymore. He posted a video up on X, and then there was a long thread following it, and a lot of people going back and forth. Some were getting really upset about it, and some were saying that they agreed, and it turned into a real conversation. So let's break this down and see what he really said and how he really feels and what this means for those of us that might actually want to code at some point later on in life. So he started with a post that said, I no longer think you should learn to code, followed by a video that was less than a minute long. And we will include a link to the X post so you can go watch the video, it said. And now this is a bold statement from somebody whose company and previous companies literally exist to make coding easier, or in the previous case, to teach you how to code. But what he really means is he's not saying that coding is irrelevant, but he's saying that the traditional syntax-focused approach to learning may be becoming unnecessary. And what he's saying is you should learn to make yourself smart. You should learn to be a critical thinker. You should learn the tools, but you shouldn't learn and train yourself to be a coder. Now, this reminds me of when I was in college and when I was in school. There was a whole bunch of courses that we took that were in and around coding. So just a little background, my focus was computer programming. That was really what I focused on. And we took a bunch of different languages, but we also took project management. We also took, theory. We talked about design and all these other things that went along with it. And the reality is a lot of those pieces are just as relevant and will continue to be as relevant as always.
Absolutely.
It may be that you may not write 150,000 lines of code, but those 150,000 lines still need to get created, but you need to be responsible for them. You need to be the person that's setting the design for what is happening, and you need to put the plans in place for the testing of it. And again, AI might be doing some of the testing. So this isn't saying that you write 4 sentences and saying, I need an application that's a video game where a cyborg shoots aliens, and then you get a video game that is that, and it's on cross-platform, and then you make $1 million.
Does this mean coding is dying?
Coding is not dying. It's evolving. And that's what he means. And this goes along with what we have been saying since we started this podcast, and practically from the very first episode, which is that AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI will.
Yes.
And this is continuing along the line of AI is another tool, just like Photoshop is a tool, and a photographer using Photoshop will always take the job of an old school photographer that takes pictures, goes into the dark room, puts that on film, and hands you a piece of paper. That's not the way the world works anymore.
Although there are markets for people who haven't modified anything. I've seen that. But the question I would have based on this is, say you're either somebody like me, so just to sort of put the contrast in, John, you went through a lot of training on software development.
Yeah.
I have a hardware-based degree. I have an electrical engineering degree, so I am much more comfortable with bus width and buffers and all the stuff that has to be put in there from a hardware perspective. And the interesting thing is, if you're in hardware, this is deja vu. Because when I learned how to do digital design, I learned how to do it on individual gates. That means 7400 series logic. One of the projects I did was I built a parallel port sitting off an ISA bus. Yes, I am that old. That had to print out our class lab group and had to have variable weight states. These days, you chuck in a microprocessor, drop in a little bit of firmware, you're done.
Right.
Would you consider this to be similar?
I would, and I would say that like AI is going to impact every aspect of life going forward. I don't think that's an overstatement here. So think about it from a hardware design standpoint. If you have a series of components, one of the jobs of a hardware designer is to understand energy budget, right? You plug in all the different components and the boards and the lengths of all of the different traces and all that stuff. The AI can figure out exactly how many watts of power you're going to need to run that board,
It's
right?
pretty good. Yeah.
So it should be able to figure that out for you. So I'm saying that again, it's going to save you time. It's going to be able to get your output done faster. And the point here is that the future of STEM is even more important. The future of education is understanding how it works and moving it forward. This is really no different than Photoshop, Excel, any other tool that sped up the process. What is Excel? Excel is a ledger book,
Yep.
right? It just does some of the work for you. It does the math for you. That doesn't mean that you're not an advanced, an accountant still uses Excel. That doesn't mean they're any less of an accountant, right? They're just it's the grind work, the busy work that they just don't have to do. They're able to do more taxes, more they do more with less time. And again, those accountants are still really, really valuable. They get paid a lot. A CFO gets paid a lot. And they need to go through the same level of training, if not more, to become a CPA. That's what we're talking about here, is that you may not need as many, to be fair, junior level programmers at the base end building the very basic code that does the kind of call it the grunt work of coding.
Which
All
is
right.
a lot of stuff you're probably outsourcing already.
And yeah, it's the stuff I don't want to write.
Yeah.
Right.
Nobody
But
else wants to write it. So
but
it's
you need
going
just as
to,
many, if not more, senior level coders that are doing code reviews, that are making sure that they're doing the design and all of those things, which is actually the more interesting part of the job. So I think that that's what this is all about.
I would have to agree. I think also as we interview people, we're going to have to start looking more for basic block level problem solving. A lot of people give code tests and I'm like, well, that's nice, but I would rather see a flow diagram of what you propose to do rather than see you write actual code, because quite frankly, the syntax and all that stuff isn't going to matter pretty soon.
It's not.
That's all going
So
to be
you're
taken
you're
over
saying
by,
this data is input, this data is output. What happened?
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
That's a great test. That'd be a great test. Yeah.
exactly. And that is also sort of a common thread with other parts of engineering, right? Electrical engineering is all about, I have some signals coming in, I have a transfer function, I have some signals coming out, and those signals all have to be impedance matched to make it to their next destination most efficiently. So, but speaking of education, let's talk about something else that sort of has snuck up on us. This came to us via Slashdot and of all things Fox Business, but it really hit a point for me and I think John when we looked at this, and that is the concept that we have this growing demand for electricity and data centers, yet we are increasingly not producing electricians. So we've talked a lot on this show about the coming rise of nuclear. I think at this point that is a given, that this is going to happen, that we need to provide more power. And we've talked about the fact that there's a need for more data centers to do this AI type high performance work. But the challenge we have is for every 5 jobs of what we call the blue collar jobs, there's only 2 people waiting to replace those people. So you want to build a bridge, you want to build a house, you want an electrical system, you want plumbing. People aren't coming in. If you guys track Mike Rowe, you already know this, but this will impact you. This will impact you. This will impact the stuff you want to do in a data center. This will impact your ability to pull new cable and upgrade stuff within your corporation. So this is stuff you need to pay attention to. There's a massive shortage of skilled electricians right now, and it's getting worse, right? The substantial portion of the current electrician workforce is nearing retirement. So nearly 30% of union electricians are aged between 50 and 70. The potential loss of over 200,000 electricians in the next decade. And it's impacting already. We're already looking. I know this personally because I've got some electrical work going on. Yesterday I was out pulling permits for the stuff I did. I'm lucky. I know how to do this stuff. I'll be doing 3/4 of it. I was able to get a person in to do the piece that requires a lot of shuffling for the main panel. But if I wasn't able to do this stuff myself, I'd be in trouble. What needs to happen, once again, I mentioned Row Works. I'm a huge fan. Training and apprenticeship initiatives absolutely need to happen. But there's massive economic implications here. So folks, you're in IT, you think this doesn't impact you. A lot of places you can't pull a circuit without a union electrician, period. This is going to hit you. So support your local stuff, support your local initiatives to bring up the trades, because it doesn't matter how many people you have in your organization that are, have degrees or whatever. I have from painful personal experience know that baseline engineers should not be allowed around voltage. And I know this because I was a technician before I was an engineer, and all of my lab instructors in analog were like, oh, technician. I was immediately a lab assistant. There's an element of Murphy's Law you don't learn it in college. You have to work with this stuff. This is really, really important. So highly suggest you support those efforts.
So, really, what's really interesting about this article, Lou, is that there's 2 sides to this. Is that we need more electricians, but we also need more electricity, and they both go hand in hand.
That
and
is
we've
true.
been talking about, the need for nuclear power for data centers, and there's a huge drive for more power in the United States that comes from the need for AI and the growth of AI, and where we know that with the upcoming projects, the AI is just going to blow up. There's just going to be massive amount of AI, and even with the things we've seen with DeepSeek that's requiring less GPU usage, it's still going to balloon out. It's just going to be,
anybody who's watching this now understands that there were recent policy changes on the case of the United States, which is aimed to try to pull manufacturing back in. That's going to need a lot of power. Right? We are in it. So if you're out there competing, and first of all, this is a tremendous opportunity, right? You're going to be out there working on projects. If you're in IT, you're going to be much more involved in your supply chain now. The flip side is those people are going to be competing with you for labor to build next generation factories, data centers, fabs, everything you can think of. So this is incredibly in your best interest to get on right now. Right? Get on it now. Because the person who's going to do the electrical for you is in high school right now.
Yeah.
You got to get to them.
And there's a lot of blue collar workers. And for those of you on the audio podcast, I'm using air quotes here, that are driving Mercedes out there right now, because the lack of skilled workers out there are driving up their prices. And every time I have somebody work on my HVAC system and I get that bill, whew, it's a lot.
I'm really glad I know how to do most of this myself, but I saw this coming. For that reason, that's why I learned it all. But I can't do everything, and neither can you. So
speaking of being able to do everything.
Exactly. These folks can't do everything. Why don't you tell us some more?
Yeah. So as Pat Gelsinger has stepped down from Intel, a new CEO has been appointed on March 18th. His name is Lip Bhutan.
Nicely
And
done.
thank you very much. I was working on that one. And so Todd has announced a plan to spin off Intel's non-core businesses. I guess those are non-core duo businesses. Oh, well, there's a lot of parts to what Intel does. In addition, I mean, they have their CPU business, they have their foundry business, and I think that there's even questions as to whether their foundry business is actually core to what they do these days, because they've been really failing badly on the foundry business. But they've got a whole bunch of side businesses that they do in a bunch of areas that are not the CPU business and not the foundries that they can just fold out. They want to reduce the bureaucracy. They want to foster a startup like culture and enhance innovation. They want to, honestly, they just want to like cut down to their what they feel is their core competency and move forward and be the Intel of old and build CPUs and do the best possible, because honestly they've been getting their butts kicked for years and they just haven't been able to keep up. That's why Apple moved away. That's why Microsoft is moving away. And like if I were going to build a gaming PC right now, I'd buy an AMD processor and put in there.
I mean, the
So
big shift I think they missed was the shift to vector processing for AI. And
yeah,
that's why NVIDIA is worth a lot more than they are now. Who knew
yeah,
that graphics card would become the core thing we need to run AI? But here
yeah.
we are, and they didn't have a good answer.
They actually should have also doubled down when people started using those graphics cards for cryptocurrency mining.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big indicator that, hey, these are not just toys for playing video games. There's actually real use here. And then it led to the AI person as well. So they're going to seek support from the U.S. government to maintain their leadership in the semiconductor market amid the global competitions that's going on. They're seeing TSMC and others that are really eating their lunch. TSMC is opening up U.S. facilities and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. But TAM has admitted their past shortcomings, and this is an easy thing for a new CEO to do, and it's really key to any new leadership. Is like, yes, we have made mistakes. It's easy to do that when it's not your mistake. So you come in, you do that, and his aim is to reposition Intel as the AI data center chip market leader and to learn from those mistakes. So that's really putting a stake in there and taking point at Nvidia and to some degree TSMC and saying we're coming after your market. So I think that that's really interesting place for them to go, and they really have to, because
Yeah, they have no choice.
because that is where the future of chip manufacturing is that you mentioned this last week, is what's the real difference between a computer of 5 years ago and a computer of today? If it's not a gaming PC, there's not really that much difference other than the TPU, the
Push is going into these things.
correct.
And
Correct.
even then,
And how many Intel chips are running inside of cell phones? Not
well,
many, none,
not
right?
not
So,
many, right? And
right.
and the thing that kills me is once upon a time they had them, right? The Z series. It seems like they don't. That this is to break into this market is a long game, right? Who's the big dog right now? TSMC is the big dog in fab space because all they do is make chips. They don't design chips, they
Right.
just fab them. Samsung is kind of a double threat. They're a fab and they're a designer.
Right.
And I know a lot about this space because my wife used to work for a company that did the same thing, NEC America, and they were the ones who were building the SGI RISC chips. The MIPS chips were being built by
Mm-hmm.
them. They're no longer in that business. Intel, IBM used to be fab, the king of fab.
Yeah.
They were always on the cutting edge. I know for a fact that IBM actually experimented using X-rays to fab to get those details tight enough. The problem is it's really tough when you have to run a synchrotron light source, a particle accelerator, to get the light to make your process. We may see that still. That may come.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That may be the next jump. That could be where Intel goes. But the question is, with all the trade stuff we're seeing going on right now there is one company in the world that makes the most advanced light source machines for fabbing, and that is ASML. And they're based out of the Netherlands, but significant chunks of their technology come from the United States and other places.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a real interesting, how this makes the shift for Intel. This could be an opportunity for Intel because everybody's sort of coming up on the same ground floor, having to push fabs into places where they weren't before. This is the next wave of automation. And this
is going to be really interesting to watch. And
yes,
speaking of interesting to watch, it is now time for the CVE of the week.
Okay.
All right. So the CVE of the week is our weekly segment where we pick a common vulnerability and exposure entry that you need to know about and how to mitigate it ASAP. And as you know, if you've been watching us for any period of time, sometimes we don't actually pick a true CVE. We go after some other security area that might be in the news or something that you need to know about and what you might need to do about it. And today we're picking something that is hot topic in the news today, and that is the signal kerfuffle. And we had our longtime subscriber, Glenn, reach out to us and ask us to take a look at this. Thank you, Glenn. And so as part of that, we actually reached out to Glenn and had him help us with this. So while we were familiar with Signal, we had not actually touched it ourselves. So what we did was we actually downloaded Signal. Lou and I did, but in order to do the testing we needed more than one user because we needed to be able to add users in and see how that process worked. I'm going to turn this over to Lou and talk about why we did this and the background behind it. I will state that there's a lot of political tension around what was going on in the White House and the Department of Defense when it came to Signal. We're going to avoid the political part of this discussion. This is not a political podcast. We're going to talk about the security concerns, what we think may have happened, and what the security ramifications might have been. And that's all we're going to talk about. So don't expect us to say good or bad things about any individuals. We're going to leave that on the table, let you guys have your own opinions on that.
Yeah, that's your problem. But let's talk about what did happen, right? There's been a lot of discussion about, first of all, we know, unless you've been living in a hole somewhere, and quite frankly, I envy you, that an editor of The Atlantic, a progressive leading magazine, was added to a high-level chat that included the Secretary of Defense and the Vice President of the USA National Security Advisor, right? So there's several issues here from a professional IT perspective that we need to look at and say, what are the lessons here? Was this a breach is the first question. And that it has certainly been played that way. I have some thoughts for you that you might want to look into. What were the legal ramifications of this? And is there a lesson for your organization in this? And I do believe there is. So first of all, John mentioned, we started out, funny thing is John and I don't even use Signal on the day-to-day. We're starting to use it now. I started digging into it. We had other methods to communicate, like, obscure SSH servers with, NOC-based port filtering or whatever. No, we don't do that. We don't talk about classified information. And I have quite a background in this from previous life. So I understand both military level encryption and why things get classified. Some of that I can talk about, some of it I can't. But it's also essentially what we wanted to understand. A lot of the talk has been that either there was a hack here or somebody surreptitiously added a user to this chat. So what we did is the two of us that don't have Signal downloaded it from the App Store, the website, brought on two other people that were using it, have been using it for a while. So we have the fresh viewpoint. We have the viewpoint of somebody who's been in the system for a while. We all got together. We created a group chat. We did some testing. So I added in one person that I'd already chatted with on Signal, therefore had a trust relationship with. And then Glenn, who also happens to be a friend of mine, but I hadn't communicated with him on Signal. So we hadn't established that key exchange yet. I added him to the chat. So what did we find out? First of all, and I'm going to save you the argy-bargy of every exact step we went through to do this, but You don't accidentally add someone to a chat, right? That doesn't happen. It takes multiple selections, and the default mode of Signal is to add from your contacts. So your trust relationship is based on the contacts in your device. Now, from what I saw, you could add a username, nickname, or a phone number asynchronously, but that was more steps, right? So that did not happen accidentally. The amount of a group chat that a member of it can see is based on when they join the chat. So we did confirm this. John and I had the chat ahead of time, and then we added my other friend John, and then we added Glenn. They could only see what parts of the chat were available when they joined. So the idea that
And
somebody
they actually had to accept the invitation. They
and
could, yeah.
yeah, and everybody was notified.
Everybody's notified.
Right.
I
When
got a
somebody,
notification when Lou added John and then added Glenn. I got a notification when Lou added them as an invitation, but then I got a notification when they accepted. So
so two steps there
yes,
where this happened. So based on our testing, our conclusion could only be that that rogue contact, whatever that was part of the chat from the very start. They were in on the whole thing. And based on what our further research indicates, it's very likely that this individual was deliberately added by somebody. But by whom? Was it done by one of the contacts, or was it done by somebody inside the organization that, for example, were these managed phones? Did somebody else put this application on the phone? And that's the challenge, right? So what was the actual risk here? Signal itself is a secure application. I've done a bunch of research on this thing. The NSA actually recommends Signal because of the recent Salt Typhoon hack. Now, we've talked about Salt Typhoon a couple of times. The Salt Typhoon hack looks like it went against the SS7 infrastructure, which means it was a state-level hack, and it got all SMS and access to your phone calls. So one of the examples that NSA used when they said use a different secure application was explicitly Signal. The recent assertions that it is compromised are not borne out by current CVE data. I did a bunch of research on CVE. There's no new CVEs. I think the last true CVE hit against this application was in 2018. Obviously, that has been mitigated. There was also another phishing attack against the service that was used to verify the phone numbers. This happened in 2022 and was also mitigated. So basically, when the NSA memo that came out used the term vulnerability, the vulnerability is not Signal, right? Remember, the vulnerability is against the trust relationship in your contacts.
Yeah.
Remember, there's two things I need to have in order to add somebody to a chat. One, by default, it wants to use your contacts. It needs you to be in the contacts, which means an attacker would have to breach the phone and add a contact. Two, somebody has to explicitly add that user to a chat. From what we know so far, there is no known bug that allows somebody to gain control over that application in your phone unless they just own your IO completely, have cracked your system, in which point you have much bigger problems. Okay? So it's possible that a malevolent internal user could maybe break into the contacts list. I think that is a possibility, but in order to get somebody like that into the chat, they would have to create the chat, add the user, and then have everybody accidentally add themselves to that chat. Now that's conceivable, but it's unlikely. Occam's razor says, you know. So here's the problem based on what we're seeing. It's what we don't know, right? One, we don't know if this was deliberate. It's likely that it was deliberate. So the question is, was this an orchestrated leak? you say, okay, that sounds silly. No, this is classic psychological operation, psyops. If you're ex-military, you've seen these all the time. If you've really been paying attention to the news, you've seen them as well. All right. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of actors. This is a classic way to try to influence somebody. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad actor. It's possible that members of this chat wanted this information to be leaked. We don't know that.
Or they may have wanted future information leaks, and they figured that may have been a while before the information was actually leaked, and that the reporter may have sat on it for a while. And that's actually one of the controversies, is that he may have jumped the gun and actually started, like, hey, look what information I have right now. So, and again, without any judgment, we're not saying
we're not
one
judging,
guy's right and one guy's wrong. We're saying that may be the situation there.
We're just looking down what the potential paths are. Another thing that we do not know that is crucial in this case is whether what these devices were, whether they were Android, whether they were iOS. It's likely they were iOS, but we don't know, right? But were they controlled by a mobile device management system? So John and I were talking about our experiences with this and logging into work email. If you have, like most people out there, Office 365, when you log into Outlook, there is a mobile device manager. Usually there's several. Microsoft has one that can control Android phones and others. PAMF is the preferred one for iOS and macOS devices that will automatically put a set of policies on your phone to lock it down and protect that information. So that means if these were MDM phones, which would be required for an internal hacker to really get to them, the most likely reason an internal malevolent actor would get to them, there were policies in place. Even if they were individual phones, like in our case, this phone right here, this very phone, when we were at our previous company, as soon as I logged into email, to get into email, I had to accept the policies. They got global device wipe. So we don't know at all whether this was the case. The thing is, in order for an internal actor to potentially cause this problem, it would have been much easier to do with an MDM. Right? All I have to do is reset some policies and insert some software. So also, I have to say, our mobile devices by default, they protect from keyloggers and contact modifications pretty rigorously.
Yeah.
And if you are running, for example, an iOS device, those updates come out and they do not allow you to sit on them for very long. So and we don't know, by the way, we also don't know if everybody was using the same type of device, or if only one device, if there was a breach, if one device was breached. But the idea that some elite hacker got in there and did this, movies do this all the time. Real world's a little different.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, and again, for however you feel about the administration, for good or for ill, it appears that this was done intentionally, that this reporter was added intentionally, and most people on the chat knew he was there. And again, you can read into that however you want, but it does not appear that it was an accident and that everything was just being done without their knowledge.
But there is a crucial takeaway you should take from this. And that is, if somebody, first of all, the Signal application uses AES 256. That is considered the standard for encryption by governments. It is considered the standard for encryption for financial transactions. And as we all know, there's nothing more important than protecting the money. So it's pretty tight stuff. And AES is a US government approved, that it is the encryption you run. The big takeaway for you is mobile device management. You need to make sure that you're checksumming the applications that are crucial to the trust chain for the Signal type applications. You need to maintain the integrity of the contact list. You need to make sure that a phishing attack that's going after a user can't inadvertently add contacts. And you need to be watching your IO buffer to see what's going on into other programs. There are ways to do this with MDM, but our advice to you, based on what we've seen, is that you need to take a good, solid look at your policy, your security policy, and your posture for mobile device management so that this will not happen to you.
100%.
So that was our read on it. Glenn, thank you for telling us to go take a look. We saw a lot of question marks floating around out there. People were attacking the integrity of the Signal application. We do not believe that was the issue.
Yeah. And I will shout out, so we definitely heard it from Glenn, but I also heard it from Tyler and Alex as well. They also mentioned that we should be taking a look at this. So we'll just throw that out there as
However,
well.
we have more data on our test, and if you're interested in a deeper dive, hit us up.
Definitely.
We'd love to talk about it. This is a really sticky one. I mean, we didn't even touch on some of the other legal ramifications, which is in Signal, you have the ability to set the messages to dissolve.
Right.
Now, one of our discussions is this current administration is moving fast. They can't always get into a SCIF or they'd be living there. So the other takeaway as an aside that I would give you is think about how you can make pervasive security easy. We all know the most perfectly secured system is one that doesn't have any users on it.
Right.
That ain't gonna fly. You got to get things done. So this should be yet another wake-up call to you that we have to come up with better methods to make security easy. Because if security isn't easy, your users will not be secure.
Yeah, I always like to say that your security system can either be easy, cheap, or actually secure. Pick two.
Pick two.
and you can move forward with it. So,
and folks, for stuff like this, and the problem is government acquisition, no matter where you stand on the spectrum politically, has always been a fustercluck, for lack of a better term.
Absolutely.
Especially as somebody who's been involved with it in 3 different government agencies. Holy crap, does it suck, right? So how do we make it so that this is easier? I mean, this is an opportunity. If you're out there at a security company, you should really be thinking about this as an opportunity to figure out a way to do this better. I know some of you are at security companies. Love to hear what you think about this. But I think
100%.
that's,
and
we
well,
covered
speaking
it.
of hearing from people, it's time to dip into the mailbag. And we've gotten some great feedback, and we love to hear from you. So we heard from a few people on YouTube. So first of all, David sent in a note saying that he was a first-time listener. And I'll read from him directly. First-time listener, I find your videos interesting, but please tone down the intro music in the future. I find it disproportionately loud with headphones. Other than that, I enjoy the episode.
What?
So I'll take that on me. I'm the one that does the editing. And I thought making the audio like really punchy and loud, and but in paying more attention to it, I think he was probably right. So I did reduce the intro music, and if you noticed, I reduced it by about 6 decibels. So I hope it's a little bit more palatable. But I want to say, keep that constructive feedback coming. If there's a way we can make this podcast better, let us know. Nobody's perfect, and I learn more from my mistakes than I do from my successes. Let us know how we can get better so that you enjoy this podcast more. And then, very interestingly, we heard from both Reginald and Norman. They both mentioned that they're still running Windows 7. Now, this is in response to our Windows 10, Windows 11 migration story from last week. And they mentioned that they weren't planning on moving off of Windows 7 anytime soon, and that they really were not fans of Windows 10. And I understand not being a fan of any particular flavor of Windows. And I also could see an argument that Windows 7 was the peak user experience for Windows. I could definitely see making that argument.
You need a really good firewall in front of your machine.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think I could condone raw dogging the internet on an OS that's got obviously unpatched security holes. I think that that's got some problems. Now, it's possible maybe they got the right firewalls in place. Maybe they've got their security locked down and that they're taking care of that. That's, that may be on them. And if you're a strong enough IT personnel, maybe you can do that. Seems a little suspect to me. Maybe go to Mac, maybe go to Linux, maybe there's other options that you can do.
But everything is about acceptable level of risks, and you have to make that decision yourself. I agree. I thought the Windows 7 UI was more responsive and better than 10 in my experience, or 11.
If you're a fan of the Windows 7 UI, I highly recommend watching Dave Plummer's video on the Longhorn debacle, and how Longhorn was the version of Windows that was supposed to come out that actually never did come out, and a lot of its pieces ended up in Vista and Windows 7. So I'm a big fan of Dave Plummer. It's called Dave's Garage is his YouTube channel. Go watch.
We
that.
highly
That was a great
recommend
video.
it.
He's a good guy and really good stuff. So with that, that's going to cover this episode. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you, and we really do want to hear what you think. Do you have a topic you want us to cover? Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback at itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X at IT SPARCcast. If you're on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. We read every single piece of feedback we get, and we respond to most. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That's really going to help this channel grow. If you feel you're getting valuable information from us, if you feel you're being entertained with that information, please tell your friends and colleagues about us. That's really going to help us as well, and help them get the same information that you're getting benefit from as well. So with that, we're going to let you go. And until next time, from the world of enterprise IT, take care.
Thank you for coming by.